So today we're going to be talking about Kantian ethics, and this is chapter 2.3 in the OCR A-Level Religious Studies syllabus. So firstly, pause this video and see whether you can define these key terms, and then we'll look right into what they actually are on the specification. So firstly, maxims. And maxim is another word for a moral rule determined by reason. So for example, if I come up with a maxim that enables me to steal, such as saying, for example, if I come up with a maxim that says people that end with the letter A in their name can steal because I want to steal something and my name has a letter A at the end, then they can steal. But Kant looks at this through the categorical imperative to say that all that isn't actually a maxim that can be upholded. But you can kind of see what the idea of a maxim is there. It's a rule that can be determined by reason. Then we have deontological, and this is from the Latin for duty, which is ethics focused on the intrinsic rightness and wrongness of actions. So things are good or right as they are. There's no thinking about the consequences and what the actions might lead to. It's all about the acts themselves and whether they are right or wrong. And that's what determines Kantian ethics. You also see a similarity here to natural moral law. Then duty. So duties are created by the moral law. To follow it is our duty. So the word deontological basically just means duty-based. And now we have the categorical imperative, and this is an unconditional moral obligation that is always binding, irrespective of a person's inclination or purpose. So it doesn't matter whether you want to do something or not, you have to do it because it is the right thing to do. And we'll look into what Kant says the aspects of the categorical imperatives are. And this really contrasts with the hypothetical imperative, where a moral obligation applies only if you want to do something or have the desired goal. So we'll look at examples of this later on as well. And lastly, kingdom of ends. So this is an imagined future in which all people act in accordance with or to the moral law. And that is part of the categorical imperative. And then we have sunum bonum, and this is the highest, most supreme good that Kant says that there is. And we'll see how he says we can reach that. So who was Immanuel Kant? So he was an important German philosopher of the 18th century, and he believed that there is a universal, objective and moral law that we can access and know through our reason alone. Kant was a rationalist philosopher, part of the Enlightenment movement. So if you can remember, the Enlightenment movement was where philosophers in mostly Europe was trying to move away from a religious perspective on ethics and in terms of reasoning for science as well. So there's a scientific and a reason-based movement in philosophy. And you get things like the French Revolution that came very vastly after, because they were destroyed the church authority of the state through reason alone. And you can use that as an example to illustrate why this happened as well. And Kant believed in acting morally in accordance with the goodness regardless of these consequences. So again, reason alone, and this is the most important thing they need to remember, is just all the things that Kant uses, we can only use our mind and our reason to justify and come up with moral laws. So firstly, we're going to look at duty and the goodwill. So what did Kant say that these were? So because Kantian ethics is deontological, they focus on the idea of duty. So again, duty and obligation, doing it for its own sake because it's intrinsically good. And Kant said that the goodwill is this idea, the concept of doing duties for duty's sake. So remember, that is what the goodwill is. So because of this, Kant thought that there is objective and absolute moral law, and morality is not just personal preference or intended or invented by society. It is more than that. There is a moral law that is intrinsically above us that we ought to follow. So moral law can be known through reason alone. And we'll look into this, what this is, but this is where the a priori reasoning comes in. And if you remember, a priori means that it's prior to experience. You know it before experience. So an example would be something like 1 + 1 = 2, where the definition is within itself, or all bachelors are unmarried men. We don't gain anything more by experiencing a bachelor, because a bachelor is an unmarried man and an unmarried man is a bachelor. It is a circular argument which can only be known through an a priori reasoning. And that's what Kant thought morality was. So Kant thought that the only thing that can be good without any qualification is this goodwill, duty for duty's sake. So purity of the motive is important for Kant, and an action is good if it is done for the right reason. But the same action is not virtuous if it is done to impress others or for some other kind of personal gain. So the example I always give here is someone donating money to charity. If someone donates money to charity because it is the right thing to do, they don't tell anyone, they just give the money and don't expect anything back. That is a really good intention. And we'll see that intention is really important here for Kant. But the intention is pure and therefore the act itself is good. However, if someone donates money to charity because they want a reward and be recognised for how much money they've given and tell everyone about it, this intention isn't pure. There's an aspect of egoism and selfishness in it, so the act itself ends up being bad. So here you can see the role of intention being really important to see whether the act itself is good or bad, or intrinsically right and wrong. So morality should not be driven by emotion is another thing that Kant is really strong on. He said that we should do the right thing because it is the right thing to do, not because we feel sorry for someone or we feel loyal to them or for any other emotional reason. So again, in the charity, my giving money to charity example, the emotional response was, I want to be recognised for doing something. And that was bad because it's the parasite in here is the ego. Whilst in the other example, when we look at someone giving money to charity because it's the right thing to do, there is no emotion in there. And therefore Kant says that this is the right thing to do and it is morally correct. And again, there are some criticisms of this role of emotion, which we'll look into later on, but I hope that these examples are something you can give. You can give your own examples as well if you want, but this giving money to charity is a really good example to illustrate this point. So Kant says this famous quote that all perception is coloured by emotion. So have a think what that can mean. But again, it just really means that everything we see can be given more light through emotion, but it shouldn't be the crux of what we see. So emotion gives us an extra aspect to what we see, but it shouldn't underpin our ethics. And Kant also gives examples of duties that people have and we need to uphold. The first one is doing good to others. And this can be seen as doing something and treating people as as ends in themselves rather than as means to an end. So you cannot use anyone, and that is a really strong duty that we uphold. So for example, if I'm friends with someone because they're rich and famous and I want to be rich and famous, that is not doing good to others. I should be friends with them because I want to be friends with them because they're a good personality, we get on really well, those kind of things. Recognising the right to property is another duty. And the example I give here normally, and it's not a nice example, but it's something that needs to be understood here, is Kant says that we need to respect every person, like we said, doing good to others. And therefore, if I want to harm an animal, I am allowed to do so if the animal doesn't belong to anyone. So for example, if I want to go out and hunt deer for my dinner, then I can go out and do that if it doesn't belong to anyone. However, if the deer belongs to someone, they are their pet, and therefore I'm not recognising the right to private property, and therefore I'm doing something that is morally wrong. Again, there's a lot of criticism to this, and there's no respect for animal rights, but this is what Kant argued is a duty. Another thing is avoiding drunkenness, because with being drunk comes a lot of emotional attachment and a lot of emotional stress on certain things. If you think about this, you can give an example. When someone is drunk, they will most likely get into arguments, get very emotional, these kind of things. And this is something that Kant wanted to avoid because it really limits our understanding of what ethics is. Another duty is not making false promises, but being truthful. So again, Kant thought this was a really important duty, is not to lie to people, but always be truthful. An example here that you can give is Kant's axe murderer example. And this is basically where Kant said, well, if an axe murderer knocks on your door and you have your friend in your house and the axe murderer wants to kill your friend, you cannot lie to the ex-murderer. You have to tell the truth that your friend is in the house. So you have to let him in. Because in that way, he says, your friend could hear it and could have time to escape. And that won't be on your moral conscience if your friend ends up dying. However, if you lie to the ex-murderer and your friend escapes and the ex-murderer bumps into your friend and they kill him, that is on your moral conscience. Again, there's also criticisms here, because you might have a conflicting duty to, well, you have your loyalty and your duty, maybe you promised to your friend that you would be able to protect them, but then you have the duty of not lying and being truthful to the ex-murderer. So again, you can kind of see that conflict, but it's a really important duty that Kant really illustrated as being truthful. Another one is not destroying or limiting other human beings. So in a sense, it's not harming anyone else. It's not using someone as a means to an end. It's respecting their body, their mind, in this sense, through reason. Then we have not destroying ourselves. And this can be seen through suicide as well, because Kant thought is irrational and contradicts our rational reasoning to wanting to end our rationality, to kill ourselves. So again, he said there's conflicting duties here. Well, not conflicting duties, but a conflicting sense of what reason and rationality is. So therefore, it's a duty not to destroy ourselves. And the last one is pursuing the greater good. Obviously, we want to do what is the best thing to do, and therefore you always have to do what is greater rather than lesser. So to further understand Kant's moral knowledge, he thought that it can be divided into two distinct parts. First, we have knowledge that comes from sense experience, known as a posteriori knowledge. And this is knowledge known through sense experience, like I just said. So an example of this is something like, it is raining outside, because I need to be able to look outside in order to see whether it is actually raining or not. So this statement can be either true or false. It doesn't have to be correct. So in this sense, when we use sense experience, it's adding something additional to what I already know through this instance, my sight, to see that it is raining. Whilst knowledge that we have at first sight or first hand is a priori knowledge, and I gave that example earlier. But again, it's to illustrate things we know prior to experience. I don't need to experience 1 + 1 to know that it equals 2. It's a logical thing that I don't need to see. I can really use only my reason and logic in order to understand that it is that. The other thing is also all bachelors are unmarried men. I don't gain anything more from the term that bachelor is an unmarried man because it isn't a definition. And the word that you can use here is a tautology. And a tautology just means something that means what it is, a definition in that sense. So these are the two different kinds of knowledge that Kant said that we have within morality. So because Kant thought moral knowledge is a priori, we do not need experience to know what is right and wrong. We need to just know it through our reason alone, just like maths. So moral knowledge comes from within us, within our minds. But Kant also thought that moral knowledge is synthetic rather than analytic. And synthetic is normally paired with a posteriori knowledge. It's also known through sense data, sense experience. Whilst analytic knowledge is normally paired up with a priori reasoning, because you don't have to experience it, you only know it through a reason. But here it's interesting that Kant says it's a priori synthetic. So in the synthetic example, which is also an inductive one, would something be like, premise 1, Sam has a tail. Premise 2, all cats have tails. So the conclusion is that Sam is a cat. However, this doesn't have to be true. Think about why not. It's because cats aren't the only animals that have tails. So it could be a dog, it could be a hippo, it could be a giraffe, it could be a donkey, any animal that has a tail. So therefore, I have to use my sense experience looking at Sam in order to determine whether he is actually a cat or not. So that's again why Kant thought it was a priori, so know through reason, but then also I gain some extra knowledge through using my sense experience. Whilst an analytic example would be something like this. Premise 1, Sam is a bachelor. Premise 2. Bachelors are unmarried. Conclusion, Sam is an unmarried man. So in this way, you can really see the logic step in reasoning. There is no kind of fault. I don't need to use experience. It all comes from the definition itself. It's analytical and it's a priori, whilst the other example is synthetic. So use these examples to really distinguish it and really illustrate the difference between synthetic, analytic, a priori, and a posteriori. So Kant said that we cannot tell something is right or wrong by looking at it, but we can bring this additional information, like I said, from our knowledge of right and wrong. So therefore, from Kant, moral knowledge is a priori synthetic. And again, we get philosophers like David Hume saying that this is wrong, because Hume said that a priori can only be analytic and a posteriori can only be synthetic. So you can use that as a definition or a criticism of Kant's knowledge through Hume, and this would be through Hume's fork, which we'll look in another topic. So because we bring additional knowledge when we are making judgments, Kant also thought that moral knowledge must be synthetic. And then we have Kant's imperatives. So Kant understood moral law in terms of the hypothetical imperative and then the categorical imperative. So he thought that moral law, which is good in itself, is categorical and not hypothetical. So the hypothetical imperative is this. It refers to rules we must follow if we want to achieve particular results. So if I want to achieve X, then I must do Y. If I don't want to achieve X, then it doesn't matter whether I do Y or not. An example you can apply to this is, if I want to be a doctor, then I have to go to medical school. But if I don't want to be a doctor, then it doesn't matter whether I go to medical school or not. Or if I want to be a ballerina, then I have to go to ballet school. If I don't want to be a ballerina, it doesn't matter whether I go to ballet school or not. It's whether you want to achieve the consequences. But then you have to do the steps in between. So again, this doesn't refer to ethics or morality for Kant, because again, his Kantian ethics is not consequentialist. It doesn't matter with the end results. It is whether you do the actions, and the actions themselves and the intentions of the actions are what is intrinsically right or wrong. So then you have this example here. So what is the categorical imperative in more detail? It refers to rules that must be followed with no ifs. So it's not like the hypothetical imperative. It's not if I want to do this, then I have to do that. No, it's I have to do this no matter what. The deontological absolutist aspect here. So moral rules are categorical imperatives because they must be followed regardless of whether we hope to achieve in the end results and regardless of our emotions or personal preferences. There is no other way. So Kant offers these three principles of the formally and the categorical imperative here. So the first one is the universal law of nature. So if we think of things being universal, it means that it should be applicable to everyone, everywhere, all the time. So they should be rules that apply to everyone at all times in all cultures. And we should not make rules where we accept or to be allowed to break them when it suits us. So one of these really big examples is truth-telling, because we always need to tell the truth. Another big one would be something like do not kill. It's universal across all cultures and all times that it is wrong to kill because you are ending a life. So this is another aspect. Whenever you have a maxim, you have to see whether it is universalizable. If it's not, then it cannot be a moral rule. The second aspect is the end in itself. So people should not use others as a means to an end for whatever purpose you want to use them for. They need to be treated as people and not as tools to get what you want. So again, with the example that I gave of being a friend of someone rich and famous just to get money and attention and fame, that is obviously wrong because you're not treating the friend as an end in themselves. You're using them as a means to getting what you want to achieve, which is a consequentialist act. So therefore it's wrong, because you should be friends with them because you like them, you understand them, you have the same kind of hobbies and values and all that kind of stuff, whatever friendships, true friendships really mean. It's not using someone. And the last one is the kingdom of ends. So people should act as if their behaviour is setting the rules or the laws in an ideal kingdom. So imagine we live in an ideal society of rational people, which laws we have to govern behaviour. Always behave as if you are following those rules. So in this ideal kingdom, no one would be killing each other. So therefore I cannot have a maxim of of murdering people, because it just doesn't act in this ideal kingdom. Think about this ideal kingdom as heaven. Kant doesn't specifically say it is heaven, but it's a nice kind of way to think about it, of what it actually is. So again, if we think about heaven, what other maxims would there be? It wouldn't have anything like, I can use people for how I want them to use them. It'd be again treating people as ends in themselves and respecting individuals and giving them dignity. Kant also gave these 3 postulates, and these are assumptions which he says that underpin ethics. So the first one is freedom. So he says that we are all free to make our moral decisions, because Kant sees people as rationally autonomous beings. So if we are not free to choose, then we cannot be praised or blamed for what we do, as we should have no choice. So we must assume that we are free to do our duty. So in this sense, it's not saying, well, I don't have any free will, everything's predetermined. Kant believes that we are autonomously free beings, and therefore we have the choice to do what we want to do, or to understand what ethics is. So therefore we can be praised or blamed for whatever we do. If I do something wrong, then I can be blamed for that action. If I do something great, then I can be praised for it. But again, we'll look into where Kant says that we cannot be fully rewarded in this life. The second postulate is immortality. So Kant says that good people should be rewarded with this ultimate happiness, and the highest good is a summum bonum. And that's just the name he gives to the highest good, so just learn what he says here. And he says that in this life we can see that it does not always happen that good people are rewarded with happiness, because obviously people suffer. So we must assume that there is an afterlife in which justice is done in the end in order to give the highest good to those that have suffered or done good and can be rewarded in the afterlife. So for Kant, that afterlife is heaven, as he was a Christian. The third one is God. So because it seems that Kant assumes that there must be a God to bring about an afterlife to ensure that justice is done, he thought that human reason could not know God, but his ethics imply a God, even though he doesn't specifically state God exists within his ethics, because it's obviously a very rationalistic ethic, so it's a good balance between the extreme of natural moral law and no morality like utilitarianism or actus utilitarianism, where anything could kind of go in a consequentialist act. So this is a good balance in between the two. However, atheists wouldn't really believe in this because they don't believe in a God, so therefore they wouldn't believe that we should be rewarded in an afterlife. But for rationalists or rationalists who are religious believers, there's a good balance between religion and rationality. So what are the strengths of Kant? Have a little think before, pause the video, have a think, and then we're going to jump right into it now. So Kant's ideas of moral absolutes can be very appealing. So morality is not changeable depending on fashionable opinion, and there are some things which can always absolutely be right or wrong, such as do not kill. And Kant also emphasises human moral reasoning, so giving autonomy to people wasting time wondering whether it is in this circumstance that they need to tell the truth or whether in that one. There's none of that. Rules are rules, so you need to make them to know what applies. So you need to know these rules, and once you know them, you can very quickly act in dire ethical situations. So if someone's drowning, you know exactly what to do. If someone asks you a question, you know not to lie. All of these kind of things. So Kant also recognises that dignity and worth of other human beings, whatever the status in society. So in this sense, again, it's a very egalitarian perspective because everyone is equal, no matter whether you're a woman or gay or a man or whatever culture you come from, everyone is worth the same. And therefore, this ethics underpins everyone. No one can be used as a means to an end. Everyone is an end in themselves. So that's a really positive here, because it doesn't allow for human rights violations. It doesn't allow majorities to win over minorities. It's equal in this sense. Of course, there's always weaknesses within Kantian ethics as well. So always, whenever you, in your exam, write out the criticisms and the strengths and really balance it between with that critical analysis to really explain why it is both positive and negative aspects of Kantian ethics. So the first weakness is that it can be cold and lacking in compassion for people's individual circumstances. Because, for example, if we want to use the euthanasia example, if someone is terminally ill and are extremely suffering and have already had a fruitful, long life, then Kant would allow them to kill themselves or to have euthanasia, because do not kill is obviously a very standalone principle. You can't use someone as a means to an end. It's not a consequential circumstance. But this can be seen as lacking compassion and being very cold and cruel in a way for some people. So it is a big criticism. Some people also argue that it fails to recognise the importance of human emotion in moral decision making. So, for example, if my mum is drowning and a stranger is drowning, Kant wouldn't say, well, you need to pick your mum first because I have a moral obligation to save my mum. No, Kant would say it doesn't matter. You cannot have your emotion within this. You need to step away from your emotion in order to do the right thing quickly. The other thing is that sometimes Kant seems to be recommending sticking to rules even when it becomes very clear that such actions will lead to terrible consequences, such as in the axe murderer example, because no matter what I say, my friend's probably going to end up die. So the best thing would probably to do is either not answer the door or lie to the axe murderer, because you don't want them finding where your friend is. But then again, there's this conflict of duties here. So therefore you can really say that, well, Kant doesn't tell us what to do when there is a conflict of duty, such as lying to my friend or lying to the ex-murderer. Who do I not lie to? Or who do I lie to in this instance? There's no hierarchy of these duties. So like I just said, there's no telling us when duties conflict, so he doesn't give us a guidance on how to make these choices. And the last one is that religious believers might actually think that Kant seems to give too much to human reason as an important place in morality rather than giving it to God. Again, not all religious believers say this, but it is a valid point of a weakness. Again, look at the key terms and see whether you can fully understand and comprehend them now. And here they are again. This is some AO1 knowledge which you can go over in your free time to really see whether you understood all of these principles. And again, if you know the answers to all these questions, then you know all of the AO1 knowledge. So again, some time for exam practice, as practice makes perfect. So have a go at doing this question or doing a plan. To what extent should ethical judgments about right and wrong be based on the extent to which duty is served? And again with this, apply all of the content that we've gone through here, and you can even say which other ethical theory might be actually be stronger, so you can use that in your criticisms as well. All this, Kantian ethics does not give enough importance to human emotions as sympathy and compassion. And here again, give your introduction of everything, go step by step of what Kantian ethics is, say why there's a lack of emotion and sympathy, and in your criticisms, after giving your strengths of Kantian ethics, you can give an example of what would be a good situation or a good Kantian ethics alternative. So it might be something like situation ethics might be stronger, because it does give importance to human emotions and sympathy and compassion through agape love and the role of Jesus. So I would really compare and give that critical analysis here, because that's what's going to push you to have those higher marks. Thanks for joining me this time, and join me next time for more religious studies, philosophy and ethics.